Hi, I'm Maureen Gummerger, and today on the God Squad, we are talking about accountability in the new administration. We are talking about human rights violations, and we are talking about what it takes to make a community. Please enjoy.
One of the things that I think what I feel good about, I feel so good that it's a new day. I felt like a 10-ton weight was lifted off of me as soon as Biden was sworn in. I felt like the world was renewed and that it was time to start anew and that things will change. And I really felt different. I felt a sense of relief that I haven't felt for a long, long, long time. And I hope things will get better. I think things really will get better. There's no way they could get worse. So I think that things will be enhanced. I think people will find a way to come together, to get along, to be happier. I think that the environment will change, not just economically, but I think that the road to recovery is on with regards to the virus. I think he's going to strive hard to solve some of the problems that this society has faced. It was painful. It was painful to see the lights come on. That about the 400 people that had died during the virus. It was very moving, and it was sad.
I really appreciate the emphasis on reckoning with the truth. It's excruciating in some cases. I think the 400,000 who've perished from COVID is one excruciating truth. I think the intentional reckoning with racism, with xenophobia, with the incarceration of children and families at the border. These
Yes.
are all necessary for healing, and they're uncomfortable truths for a lot of folks who are not directly affected by it and would prefer not to hear about it because it's messy and it's painful. But it's what I'm really appreciating about sort of the way this administration has set off is that they appear, courageous in dealing with these hard truths, so that we can move forward with accountability and clarity. That the reconciliation process is not about obscuring or keeping hidden what has been harmful or injurious, because that isn't healing, right? We know that accountability is necessary in order to move forward.
I mean, I don't want to sound like a downer because we are moving on, but they were talking about the men from the National Guard
Mm-hmm.
being put in the garage and
Mm-hmm.
having to sleep on the ground. And immediately, a lot of the political leaders started hammering in on those who are responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And I started thinking, isn't that kind of hypocritical? I mean, these men are trained, they go to war, but where were these same politicians where those kids were sleeping on the ground? Those kids weren't trained to sleep on the ground, to go hungry, to endure the wet not tile, but bricks on the on a parking garage floor. And where was the outcry? I mean, I think we have to look at society or the community in with a wider lens instead of a narrow lens. We
Mhm.
have to look at what's good for humanity, that what's not good for soldiers is not good for little children. And those children had to have suffered much more than any grown up can ever suffer. And to be cold and afraid and alone to boot. And not they're not going to get that hot meal 3 times a day. They're not going to get that blanket. They don't have a duffel bag to put under their heads and sleep at night. And while I think that the National Guard should have been treated better, I think that this country dishonored those immigrants and their children by treating them horrifically. And I think that it was crimes against humanity that were committed. And I
Agreed.
think if we're going to go forward, let's go forward. Let's charge who should be charged for crimes against humanity. Let's make reparations to those children and to their families. Let's go completely forward. And we'll never be able to fix it, but at least we can fix some of the trauma that these parents and these children have experienced.
But I think before we can do that, one of the responses that you see sort of repeatedly when having these discussions with people is placing blame back on the children and their parents, and placing the sense of, well, they shouldn't have come here, then that's too bad, it's their own fault. And I don't think you can have a conversation, like a social conversation, that says we need to look at our individual actions, that, whether it was how we voted or how we looked away, or, whatever it was that made this possible, until we can get to a collective space where we recognize humanity in each other. Right. And if we're taking that from a faith perspective, so from Christian perspective, we're supposed to recognize everybody as brothers and sisters in Christ, regardless of what their faith or where they're from, their nationality. We're not doing that as a nation. If we want to say we're a Christian nation, we're not behaving as a Christian nation. I know we're not supposed to say we're a Christian nation, but there's a lot of Christianity imbued in our politics, and it's the dominant faith here. So if we want to have that conversation, especially people who are more conservative and Republican, right wing, if they want to say, hey, we're taking this Christian approach, then there needs to actually be a Christian approach, which is not happening.
Even from a secular viewpoint, the laws of this nation, which the United States has signed on to with the UN Convention Against Torture, allows people to come to the border seeking refuge in this country. And just because someone decided to change the rules of the game at one point in time doesn't mean, and the United States never pulled out of that. And
Right.
so these people had every right to
Absolutely.
try to escape their torment and come into this country, and not to be received how they were received. And certainly there is nothing in the laws of this land, nothing in international law that allows someone to take someone's children away from the parents, literally orphan them from their parents, and keep them captive, and then send the parents away fully aware of the fact that they had no intention of bringing them back together again. They hid the list. So they're the lawbreakers, not the ones that came to the border, not the ones to the border.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, Katie.
Oh, no, I was just saying that was definitely intentional. The Trump administration admitted that was an intentional deterrent. And I think we've talked about that in the past, that was intentionally done.
So my question, Kalila, because I feel like you have a lot of knowledge in this area, is what happens when refugees are met with crimes against humanity from a legal perspective? I'm not even sure what the punishment for that is. And then I'm also really curious about, I've thought long and hard about what reparations would look like. And I mean, there is the obvious reuniting these children with their parents, but then beyond that, I'm really curious about what from a mental health perspective and from a life, a quality of life perspective, I'm curious about what we might do as a nation to help them rebuild the lives that, were so profoundly injured by unjust US intervention. So I realize that's a two-part question, but I'm curious about both of those things.
I think that the right thing to do is to give the parents advance parole so they could come back into the country and find their children, be reunited with their children. Even the ones that have been reunited with their children, they need to be given residency, as what's it called, reparations for what has been done to them. They came here seeking refuge. It doesn't make any sense to send them back to the place where they were harmed. Let them come to the United States. Let them have residency. And also, now that we have some of the criminals are regular citizens, I don't care about federal charges, but there's international laws. They should be charged with crimes against humanity. They should have their tails hauled to the Hague, and they should be tried for crimes against humanity. What they did was, they had a plan, an evil, sadistic plan to do that, starting with Sessions, Stephen Miller Sessions, all the way up. And if they didn't have a plan, they would not have tried to shred documents with the names and the telephone numbers and a whole list of plans that they did to separate these families. So they committed international crime. And if the United States had any self-respect, they would allow them to be rounded up and taken to be prosecuted. I don't know why this country always thinks that other countries have to, like the Serbians have to submit to international law and Germans have to submit to international law, but Americans don't. Americans that commit crimes against humanity, they must submit to international law too. And their cruelty in many of these cases equals what the Serbians did and what they did in Germany and other countries. In fact, some of these refugees were shot coming into the United States. They were drowned, they were shot, they were paralyzed. All kinds of atrocities were committed against some of these refugees. And there are also refugees that have literally had to pay Border Patrol to get into the country. So they're not clean either. And as soon as America starts realizing that these guys that stand up at these border crossings are not angels, but they're hustlers, they're criminals. They sell drugs more than the cartels sell drugs. As soon as if America really wants a clean house, start looking at the ones who that they hesitate to call the criminals, them, send them to jail, put honest people in responsible positions, and let these people that seek refuge in the United States have the chance that they deserve. Otherwise, nothing gets solved. And Border Patrol has been pulling this crap for years. For years, they have been getting together with the coyotes and bringing in people while padding their pockets with money. That's wrong. From Honduras, and they have let people die in the desert. Old people, they give them a big bottle of water. When they're finished drinking that water, they don't give them another bottle and they leave them there to die. And Border Patrol picks up some of these people, they bring them into the country, and then they blackmail them once they're here. This is common amongst refugees seeking refuge here. They didn't come here to be blackmailed. They came here for freedom. They're not free.
And do you know this because you are doing this work at the border?
Yes. I have clients. Clients from Honduras, from Colombia. It's the same story. Texas border and San Diego border is infamous for doing these things. And it's wrong. They are they are the worst criminals today, but there's a certain law that makes them exempt from constitutional mandates. When I was at the border, they told me, well, the Constitution doesn't exist here. I went, excuse me? Yeah, the Constitution doesn't exist here. And they did everything they wanted to do without any fear of retribution from the laws of this land. That's wrong.
It is. It is. And I'm curious about how, you know, as a country and as citizens, we might draw attention to and advocate for accountability, right? Like, we're talking about the actual draining of the swamp, the operational definition of which is clarity and honor and, you know, following the laws of the land, treating people with humanity, being honest, so not taking briberies, you know, being free of corruption. And, you know, I don't know if we can ask for a platform from this administration to work on these things. I believe so. Yeah.
Know that that anybody can file a complaint with the Senate Ethics Committee and ask for a hearing on any subject matter that they want, and a group can go together to discuss what exactly is the problem and the solutions that they're looking for. And as far as immigration is concerned, I think it's time for citizens to demand a platform with senators, with congressmen, and insist on accountability, and have some of the people, some of the refugees that are willing to speak about these things, to go before Congress or go before the Senate and talk about the way they were treated and tell their stories, because they're willing. They're willing to tell their stories. And these stories were reported to the authorities. They did nothing.
I think it's
The
important,
tape,
Maureen,
tape.
to have
Yeah.
conversations with appropriate terminology as well, because I think the public sort of commonly conflates different terms. So the vast majority of the people who come at the border are asylum seekers. Even though we might sort of conceptualize them as refugees, they're legally different than refugees in the country.
Right. I mean,
And
seeking from other countries.
right. But if we're having policy discussions, right? So Trump dropped the refugee admission ceiling lower than it's been in, I think, about 70 years. And people got excited about that because they thought that that would control the border problem, the completely different issues. They also don't realize, like Kalila mentioned, that the United States has policies in place for asylum seekers. There are ways for people to seek asylum who are not designated as a refugee, but they have to come into the country through valid ports of entry first and basically say, hey, help me, which is what the people at the border are doing. But the Trump administration, instead of allowing them to go through the valid, legally established process, started doing things like closing access to the border ports where they had to get through. So if they have to get into the country to access our asylum laws, and our government has blocked the legal access to that, what else are they supposed to do other than try to get into the country to access the legal process, right? And I think when we're having discussions, it's so important to say, okay, there's a process for refugees that goes through the UNHCR. There's a process for asylum seekers. And then there's people who are economic migrants or who are just coming here of their own volition to sort of find a better life for them. All of which, right, regardless of which category we're talking about, all of which are supposedly American ideals, every single one of them, regardless of the category. But I do think it's real important to be cautious with terms so that we don't conflate issues and then vote on the wrong things.
Right. Well, there was a group of people, they were, I think, about 7 or 8 people that came to the border, and I was with them. They were seeking asylum. They submitted their asylum papers, and Border Patrol threw their applications into the garbage. Into the garbage. These people,
Illegal.
they met all the criteria for asylum. We had the okay of the director of USCIS about the process. Okay, we're going here, we're going to do this. Is it legal? Blah, blah, blah. He said yes. But administration changed. All of a sudden, these societies are being treated like they are the scum of the earth, and me with them. And they literally threw their applications in the garbage can, threw my passport in the garbage can, and they treated us with no respect whatsoever. They behaved as if they were above the law. And there is, I think it's, I don't know if it's a 60 or 100 miles um, beyond the border. It's basically, it says that they can do whatever they want within this 100 miles. And they take advantage of that. They take advantage of that. And if you go to the border that separates San Diego and Tijuana, you cannot imagine how many people have been shot by Border Patrol, how many have been sprayed with tear gas and I forget the other substance, how many people have actually died at that border, and still nothing has changed. Everything remains the same. And they also, there are cameras. They basically cut the cameras, okay? They modify the cameras. They show what they want to show to make themselves look innocent. I mean, they're able to manipulate the system to their advantage, and people don't get their rights. People, asylees and immigrants, whether it be refugees or whatever, they're always assumed guilty before they're assumed to be innocent. Like their story is invalid. Okay. But if any of us were to go to their countries and live in those conditions, we would not consider ourselves to be anything but victims. We would want to get the heck out of there. I lived in Lebanon for 3 years. It was misery, misery, always bombing, always economic problems. Always, there was something always going on there to make life miserable for the people. And same thing when I was in Afghanistan. I said to my friend, I would do anything, say anything to get out of here permanently. I could not imagine living the rest of my life in that place. Nothing's changed. Nothing has changed. And if we're going to be the caretakers of the world, then let's be that. At least if we don't want to bring everybody here, instead of using our money on weapons of mass destruction, can we use that money to improve the lives of people abroad in poor countries? Can we use it to enhance their education?
We still have a whole reparations process that I would prefer for US intervention in Central America, which is a great deal of where a lot of the asylum seekers come from, if I understand correctly. You know, our behavior in the late 70s, early 80s in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador is breathtaking in its atrocity.
When Ronald Reagan was selling drugs, so that the what is it, the
Sandinistas,
could
Nicaragua.
Right. So they basically sell those drugs to people in the ghetto and use that money to do what they want to do there. Yeah.
We also trained, you know, the Atlicado Battalion at the School of Americas, which went through, you know, community after community, systematically murdering men, women, and children in El Salvador in early 1980, I believe. And our, you know, our intervention, we were partially responsible for that. And I can't speak as much to our intervention in the Middle East, but we have, you know, ideally we have reparations, you know, to support these countries, to clean up the mess that we created, or helped create in any case. You know, we played a huge part in anti-communist action. And there are still folks that are suffering greatly because of that destabilization.
And that's accurate in the Middle East also. So we had a lot to do with issues in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a lot to do with the Syrian war. And we're actively creating refugees around the world. And you're exactly right. You know, the US needs to pay attention to the fact that we're causing a lot of the problems that we're then refusing to take responsibility for. I think the question becomes, given that sort of the dominant rhetoric in the US is our military is here to save us, right? They're here to be wonderful. They're protecting the world. They're bringing democracy everywhere, which is not accurate. But
Right.
this is what we're told from the smallest ages. You have, children in preschools and kindergarten writing thank you letters to the troops because you're already ingraining these kids that this is the way our country works. So, and then our education system, right, paints the entire history from that perspective of, yay, the US is saving the world. So when you come in front of a group of adults now and say, hey, we kind of caused these problems, they get ragefully angry at you for saying things like that because it counters what they know about their great nation. So how do you, or how do we, or how does the United States as a whole break through that issue?
In minds is connection and discussion. But I think that, there's a segment of us that has to proceed authentically with raw information. And then there's a segment of us that has to proceed with connection and safety to introduce these hard truths, because the truth about American war interventions is traumatic. And finding that out was, I think, after I graduated from college, reading up on some of US interventions in other countries and having been sold that belief, right, that all of our wars are to improve the lives of others. And finding that, all of our wars were to ensure fair trade at the cost of human lives, and economies, and stable governments, and therefore families and communities. The idea that we would elevate money over people again and again and again was soul crushing, as it should be. But I feel like these conversations, it's important to proceed with the expectation that there will be resistance, because that is, it's a really hard reality for folks to tolerate, that, this US narrative is not accurate.
I think they need
What are
to
your
start like a scale, okay, from 1 to 10. Which level makes you a dictator, okay? So that, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say Saudi Arabia. 10, for sure, they're thugs, okay? Don't sell them any more weapons. Should not have weapons. Look around the world. If they're gonna say, Putin, we know where he's coming from. He should never be sent even a carrot peeler, okay? A carrot peeler is a dangerous weapon in his hand. But Saudi Arabia should not be sent one either. UAE shouldn't be sent one either, and really, Netanyahu has violated the rights of the Palestinian from A to Z, okay? And why the United States is so vested in this guy is beyond me. And I'm not saying this as a Muslim, I'm saying this as a human being. That man is evil, and he violates the humanitarian rights. He has killed children, allowed children to be crippled and bombed. And while all the other cities around Tel Aviv have plenty of ventilators, plenty of vaccines, none of those ventilators, none of those medications, none of those vaccines are going to the West Bank or to Gaza.
That's part of that rhetoric that says we're only safe as a US nation if we have a strong military and keep sort of, quote, defending from these perceived threats that are often not threats.
Did that start with Reagan, or did he just make it more popular? I feel like Reagan really, that was a lot of his message, was that we had to strengthen US military. To strengthen democracy, we had to strengthen our military. And our military is made up of humans, and I want to honor the humanity of the humans in the military. But the military programs and the amount of money that goes to our military budget is atrocious. And back to Maslow's hierarchy, which I reference from time to time, it's unnecessary. We don't have attacks on US soil, except for example, there's a lot of white supremacist attacks on US soil, which ironically The FBI and Homeland Security don't seem to be spending much time with these days. Perhaps that will change under this administration. But our threats from afar just don't seem to be particularly pressing at the moment.
And the thing is, we're not honoring men and women in the armed forces when we send them to die in a war. Basically, has nothing to do with the United States. The United States shouldn't be there. The worst thing is to find out a 20-year-old kid has been killed. He is never going to be what he should have been, what he could have been, because someone decided to send these kids to go fight a war they should not have had to have. They should have never been there to begin with. And it's sad. It's sad. I mean, there have been parents that have lost 2 kids in the war. Why? Why did they have to endure that? And that was the thing that really got me about the last administration. He never welcomed one body back from the service. Even the men in Afghanistan that were hunted down by Putin's men and assassinated, he never even spoke to the situation, never acknowledged it, never dealt with it, never owned up to it. He literally walked away from it. And that was somebody's kid.
There's a process.
We have to have really honest conversations too about who is being sent off to die. For more often than not, there's a racial and a class component to that because of the military's rhetoric of here's your guaranteed stipend, you can go to college, right? Who are we sending into the military? People who can't get a job, people who don't have anywhere to go, people who want to go to college and don't have any money for that. So it disproportionately affecting people who are non-white and people who are in lower socioeconomic classes. And that's a conversation that we don't have a lot either.
Yeah, because you can't use that college. You can't use that college money if you're dead.
Right.
I
Agreed.
think you can. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. People.
But look at all the backlash that people are getting in Congress when they say, hey, let's talk about a universal basic income, or hey, let's talk about making sure that up to a bachelor's degree or even an associate's degree is paid for. I think that people who are more in charge start to freak out because they realize that the system that's set up to funnel people into the military and keep this whole thing going is not going to work when we start treating people, everybody in the country, with that level of here, we're providing for you as this great nation.
And then what we should do is say, hey, you don't need to be reelected again. You need to go find another job because we don't need you here when you don't look at the needs of the people right here in this country. These guys are becoming antiques sitting there. They have done nothing for decades. If they can't get with the program needs to cut them loose. And we need to put people in those offices that are actually going to have a list of things they're going to do for the people. And then at the end of 4 years or 6 years, there should be a checklist. If they haven't done it, bye. Go somewhere else, buddy.
I'm really excited to see what this generation of teens and young 20s who are growing up now does when they start getting into office and making policies, having lived through all of this.
And
we need to be very interesting
financially. We need to give them the money to get educated, give them the money, become advocates for the people. We need to give them all the information that they need to really represent Americans, to really represent that American dream for society in general, to really to stay the course without big business trying to corrupt what they're about. We need to remove all of the noise so that they stay focused on the goals and not let people interfere in that, because that's what happens. You have Wall Street, you have all these big companies that are able to lobby for what they want. And all of a sudden, what we want, what the average person wants, it gets lost. It just gets totally lost.
Corporations as, with personhood is a real problem. And perhaps we should unpack that at some point because, if corporations have the same weight as people, then people lose their humanity.
Yes.
So, accountability means reckoning with some of these hard truths that there are policies that have been put into place over the last 40 years that are really harmful to people. And most faith communities value their people, their communities, their, the humans that inhabit their world, and restoring power to and respect for and humanity of people is one value that the three of us share. And I think a lot of faith communities do. We just have to reconnect with it.